You're listening to WMPG 90.9 Gorham, Portland, Southern Maine Community Radio from USM. Live from the Orion Cygnus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, this is Scientifically Speaking, a weekly half-hour program devoted to elegant curiosities, and I am one of your hosts, Sarah Chang, and joining me, as always, is Bernie Rhyme, DJ Starwatcher. How are you, Bernie?
Yes, hi, Sarah. Very good, thank you.
Bernie is our professor of the astronomy lab here at USM and our local protector of the night skies. Reach out to us at WMPGScientificallySpeaking@gmail.com or on Twitter at WMPGSciSpeak. And you can head over to WMPG.org to find the last 5 weeks of archives of all of your favorite shows, including this one. Bernie, could you let our listeners know what is up in the night sky for this coming week?
Yes, certainly. So this will be Friday, May 20th. So we're going to have a last quarter moon on the 22nd. So it'll be technically a waning gibbous rising around midnight. So now we're actually airing this. We're recording it before the lunar eclipse. So hopefully it was clear Sunday night and you got to see the lunar eclipse. Right now it's supposed to be clear. So it'll be just after that lunar eclipse that we just had. And then the days are getting really long. The sunrise now is at 5:11 in the morning and doesn't set till 8:04 at night. So they're almost 15 hours long. And then otherwise, all the planets are still dancing in the morning sky. Jupiter and Venus are getting further apart, and then Mars and Saturn are pretty close. So all four are still there, and it won't be until June when Mercury will join them, all the four other planets, to make a total of 5 in the morning sky in June. But right now you got 4 of them, and you got a waning gibbous moon, and that's about it for this week. Not as exciting as last week with the eclipse, but still a good week.
Well, thank you, Bernie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And if you couldn't take notes fast enough, you can also check out the monthly What's Up column in the Portland Press Herald. So, for today's show, welcome to another episode of Scientifically Speaking. We are going to highlight a scientist and a book that she has come out with. I think it came out in September of 2021. But we are celebrating and talking about Dr. Katharine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us. And Bernie, could you talk a little bit about how you came across this book?
Yes, so a couple interesting ways, which is a good coincidence. It wasn't just a one-time thing. I first saw her on Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk. He gets the best experts in the world to talk about all kinds of different topics now, not just astronomy. And he has to do something new every single day. We just do it every week. So she was there. And then actually I went to a conference. I thought she was going to be here live just last weekend at the Graves Library in Kennebunkport. So there were 30 people live, but she came to us through Zoom, live on Zoom from Texas, where she lives. And then I bought her book there, and you have it up behind you, so that's good for the people that see the video part of it. So, and then we could ask her some questions live, and we even broke into the groups to do actual discussions to see what we can do. And then since then, I've watched her TED Talk. I saw her on Jimmy Kimmel. So, then, of course, once you know a person, then you try to get a little more information on them. So, a lot of different ways I found out about her.
Yeah. I feel like, Bernie, once you just like you were saying, once you learn about something, you just dive deep and you're like, I'm going to find out everything about them.
Well, yeah, I can always go deeper, but yeah, of course, especially if we're going to do a show and then I got to, find out more about her.
So, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, she is an atmospheric scientist. She studies climate change, which she believes is one of the most pressing issues that we face today. And she is not just, I believe in it because she, has faith that it is happening. She actually develops and analyzes models. She looks at the data. She works with engineers and city managers, planners, ecologists, everything to really quantify the impacts. And so she knows that the planet is warming. And she came out with this book to talk about how we can talk about climate change to everybody around us and in our community, in our circles. Just a little bit more about her. She started her career with a bachelor's in physics and astronomy from the University of Toronto. At that time, she took a class on climate change with Dr. Danny Harvey, who I guess is well known in the climate science space. And that was what got her hooked onto climate science. And that was when she was like, wow, everything that I've been studying in physics is pretty much what climate science is based on. And so when she went on to her master's, she studied atmospheric science at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and then she got her PhD, I believe, at the same school. And there she did research to survey and compare statistical downscaling methods used to generate kind of CO2 and carbon emissions. And so her work has actually been published in over 125 peer-reviewed papers. And right now, or today, she is the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy and a bunch of other things. She's also the scientific advisor to climate communication, climate matters, citizens climate lobby. There's a million things.
Yeah.
She is just involved in pretty much everything that, like, you've never even heard of these organizations. She's been involved in all of it. So she's kind of like Bernie. She looked up climate change and then just like dove as deep
Well,
as
she
she
went
could.
way further than I did, though. Yeah.
So, Bernie,
Yeah.
you are our resident book reader.
Hmm.
What exactly is this book about? I know we talked
Yeah.
briefly, but why did she write this book? What is the purpose of this book?
Well, mainly so we could communicate about it and that we have more hope. It wasn't another gloom and doom book. So the subtitle of the book is A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World.
Mm,
So I'm glad that I went to that conference, because then I actually could buy the book without just ordering it or going through a bookstore. So I have the book right here in front of me. It's really well organized. As you said, it only came out September of last year. And it gives a lot of her experiences, what we can do. I'll just go through some of the sections, and there's no technical, it's not a big graphs in it or any of the detail. I mean, she knows all this stuff, but she didn't put that in. It was just a good guide for regular people like us and our listeners of what they can do. So the first section is called The Problem and the Solution. So she puts it out very clearly. Then why facts matter and why they're not enough, because I'm sure you've heard a lot of the facts, but they're not
mhm.
going to be enough. Then the threat multiplier is not just some far off thing that's just happening, up in the North Pole, or there's some islands that
Right.
are getting submerged. That's happening right here. Then we can fix it, which is always good, the optimistic part of what we can actually do. And then the last section is why you can make a difference.
Mm.
So that's much more optimistic. We're not past some kind of a tipping point. I talked to some really smart ex-teachers at UNE, and they think it's already too late, and then they don't want to talk about it, and that's not true. It's a good time to write this and for people to listen more and talk about it.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that strategy, and I
Mhm.
think we also strive to kind of present an optimistic angle to all of these devastating things on our show as well. So more about like why she wrote this book. Thanks for going through the overview.
Mhm.
She had talked about how, like, the as I mentioned, she's a scientific advisor to the Citizens Climate Lobby, and one of the reasons why she wrote this book was to answer many of the questions that would often and repeatedly come up by people who are part of the Citizens Climate Lobby, so CCL, and and so that's kind of one reason why she started to write this book. And as you heard, she's very involved in communication, so she understands the importance of language and having conversations that are meaningful to ultimately impact those around us, because yes, it is about things that we do, but it's also about how can we talk with people and make it so that they, in some ways you are trying to influence them, but collaboratively rather than kind of combatively and trying to force people to believe a certain side. And so one of the things I really liked about her title, she talked about, why is it called Saving Us? Is she really emphasized that it's not really right to say that we need to be shifting our focus to save the planet, because she
Yeah.
emphasizes that the planet actually doesn't care. In fact, the planet would be doing much better without us, and,
Mhm.
which I thought was just a fantastic point. It really is about saving us, not really about saving the planet. And she had talked about, like, the cockroaches don't care. Like, literally nobody cares. We need to just care about ourselves. And for all the capitalists in the world, our economies won't go with us if we can't, like, nothing, they're not going to go anywhere if we can't survive here. And, to that point, that's probably why some of those rich people are trying as hard as they can to get off the planet.
Mhm. Right, maybe.
So one of the things I think that is really pivotal in her book is she talks about the spectrum of climate believers. So let's start there. Bernie, I think you have a
Yeah,
list of, yeah, that
right.
range of people.
So it's really interesting that it's not just black and white. It's not just believers and deniers, or however you want to classify, and associate them with either religion or politics or whatever else. So it's way more interesting than that. So the first group is alarmed. So I'm gonna start with the group that is most, is actually alarmed and most believes in it, and that's about 20%. And then there's a group that's concerned, so they're not quite as worried about it, and that's probably another 15 or 20%. Then there's a group that's cautious, so they're kind of in the middle of the spectrum because there's six altogether. So that's about 20%. Then there's a group that's disengaged. So that can be kind of dangerous. I mean, they're not really denying it, but they're not doing anything about it. And that's about 8 or 10%. Then we're getting closer to the ones that don't agree. Then we have a group that's doubtful. So that's probably about 10 or 12%. And then there's a group that's dismissive. So they're completely denying it, and that's only 7%. So 93% of the people in the spectrum you can talk to, they're reasonable, you can discuss things, they can make changes. Only 7% that kind of, they're just not going to talk to you or just tell you why it's all a hoax, and that's only 7%. So that's a way better way to look at the whole thing.
Where do you think you fall?
Well, I'm not really alarmed, but I'd say concerned.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And you said that was about 20%?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what is the difference between like concerned and cautious? Like, what do you have to be alarmed? Are those like the people freaking out about it?
Yeah, probably the ones that think, like, even as I just mentioned, that I know some good ex-teachers that think we're beyond the tipping point, so they
Mm,
would be alarmed, and
yeah.
then they're probably so frightened they're not even going to be able to do anything, even though they probably could. Later on, we'll give you some tips of what you can do and how you can calculate a carbon footprint and all that. But if you're in that category, yeah, if you think we're past the tipping point, then that's not good either.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
So one of the things she, as far as like tips on how to talk to people, she, I think we'll highlight like two of them, a
Hmm.
couple of them. But one thing I really liked about one of her tips was that she really emphasizes, making a bond or making a connection with the people that you're talking to. And it feels very obvious, but somehow we do talk about things that are kind of happening far off, like, islands that are going underwater or coastlines that are disappearing. And so she really says, do not talk about polar bears to people living in Idaho. Talk about corn. Don't talk about polar bears with people living in California. Talk about wildfires and droughts. Don't talk about sea level rise with people who are living in Montana. Talk about whatever else. Hurricanes. I don't know if they get hurricanes there.
I don't think so.
Maybe I don't know, Nebraska, Kansas. How about that? Kansas.
Yeah.
Don't talk about sea level rise to people living in Kansas. And that's a really good point. And we here living in Maine, we do hear about polar bears, and I think that is really sad and like upsetting. Um, but I'm sure that there is a majority of the population who's like, well, but how does that affect me?
Mhm.
Right? That is ultimately the question. And sometimes those things that are far away, it's just hard to kind of relate to them. And so her point is that everybody is affected in some way. We just need to talk to them. And so I think Bernie, you
Yeah.
have some really good examples about like,
Yeah.
in
Like if you like to do anything outdoors or even indoors for that matter, like she talked about skiers and how you could talk to them. Tennis players, the Australian Open is getting so hot there because they hold that in January in Sydney or Melbourne that they can't even play tennis outdoors. Baseball is getting so hot, and she lives in Texas, that outdoor baseball might not even work anymore in the summer in Texas. And so it's not just Olympic skiers and people that always have to be out. It really affects everyone in some way because most people enjoy the outdoors and want to do something, and that'll be disrupted.
right, right.
Yeah.
What do you think about here in Maine? So, like, I think it's one of the easiest ones is obviously we have to deal with sea level rise.
Mhm.
GMRI has a really great map on what does, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 feet of water, sea level rise, how does that affect, just our greater Portland area, for example,
Mhm.
but the entire coastline of Maine. But what are some other examples that you feel like you could bring up with people?
Well, in Maine, I guess we're kind of lucky in a way because we don't have the hurricanes or tornadoes.
Hmm.
Ski areas, I think, well, I know that the ice is getting out of the lakes a lot quicker,
Yeah.
and ski areas are having some trouble. They're
Hmm.
closing earlier and opening later. So the skiers, I know everyone doesn't really care about the snow. Some people would actually prefer less snow or warmer or longer growing seasons. So it's kind of good in that sense. But it's bad because then, of course, a lot of the wildlife and birds, when they
Mhm,
get back, insects, it would allow dangerous insects to, take hold earlier.
mhm.
Obviously, more ticks if it's warmer, all those type of things. So there's
Yeah,
things in
yeah.
Maine too.
Yeah, I mean, we'll lose fish populations.
Yeah,
We are already seeing declines in lobster populations or kind of our catch,
yeah,
which is why I think a lot of kind of not fishermen, but those groups are moving towards like oysters
mm,
because those
yeah,
can survive and they're kind of easier to maintain. The other one that I recently heard about was smelting, which I think is like a big part of Maine culture in the winter. So those little shacks that they set up on rivers, on the frozen waters, apparently in the past they could do it from like starting in November, and now the window is so short, it's
yeah,
January to the end of February.
right.
And so that's a
Mhm.
thing that you do in the winter, and it was a livelihood for people who couldn't make money otherwise. That's going away because of climate change.
Yeah. And the other thing I heard, the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than any other place in the world right
Mm.
now. Just
Mhm.
the water in the Gulf, which will affect some of the things that you just talked about.
Yep.
So,
Um, the other tip that she talks about is to not approach a conversation by talking about devastation, which is probably what we are doing.
yeah,
But
right. That's all these terrible things. Well, you asked for tips of what Maine versus some other states.
well, it's about like,
Yeah,
that was just a recognition of like, yeah, it is right here and it is actually affecting the things that we do
yeah.
on a yearly basis. And I do tell people I'm like I was thinking about leaving Maine at some point. Like I thought I would be gone by now, but then now with the climate change trajectory, I'm kind of like, well, maybe this will be the place to be because now like in 10 years we'll have like papaya trees and like
Hmm.
pine, palm trees on our
Oh,
beach.
yeah. Well, yeah. Maybe not 10 years, but soon.
So anyways,
Yeah.
so she recommends to not to never to ever never ever approach a conversation by talking about the devastation. So don't scare, cause panic, or cause depression because our ability to dissociate is super strong. Essentially, if we learn about something that is super worrying, but we don't know what to do about it, our immediate defense mechanism kicks in and we just disassociate. And so we'll just go and, start ordering toys for our pets or something like that online. And so we just go back to what we were doing and we lose hope. We can't do anything about it. So why go around kind of carrying that anxiety because we know that it's not healthy. And Bernie, you have a very good excerpt from her book about moving
Yeah.
past our fears.
Yeah, so this is under the second section that it's subtitled Why Facts Matter and Why They Are Not Enough. So this particular part of that section is called the fear factor. And then this part is moving past our fears. So the quote is here. To be human is to be a bundle of contradictions and to have an aversion to anxiety. We do not accept climate change because we wish to avoid the anxiety it generates. George Marshall writes in his book, Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. As humans, we are prone to tuning out repeated bad messages if they do not relate directly to our lives, or if we feel like fixing them would be even worse for us than letting them run their course. Our emotional bandwidth is limited. Digging beyond our emotions into the actual wiring of our brains, hundreds of experiments have shown that humans are literally hardwired to move towards pleasure and away from pain. Translating this into a message directly relevant to climate change, neuroscientist Tali Sharot says, the human brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not with avoiding harm, because that is often the most useful response. We're more likely to execute an action when we are anticipating something good than when we are anticipating something bad. And fear also hampers our ability to think creatively. As environmental engineer and eternal optimist, Katie Patrick reminds us, when the body releases stress chemicals, the brain shuts down the hippocampus region and you lose about 30% of your brain function, including the creative thinking facilities. Fear and doom shut down your brain capacity for creative thinking. Vision and optimism super boost it. So that's the whole point in exact words from Dr. Katharine Hayhoe.
Yeah, wow,
Yeah,
excellent.
yeah, pretty good, huh?
Yes, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think the whole message, though, is
Mhm.
that we really need to have conversations that end with the prospect of hope and the belief that we can indeed do something.
Yeah.
And I don't have this quote, but I think it was from, the recent IPCC
Hmm.
report, which was, I think, very hopeful. And we have a show where we kind of try to digest some of that
Hmm.
for listeners. But the I think there it did talk about all of the little things that we can do and why all of those little things do matter.
Yeah,
But
so we should let
oh,
our listeners know to try to listen to that TED Talk. I think 6
yeah,
million people watch it, and the whole point was to talk about it. She doesn't give you huge numbers and figures. You can get that from any other science and any other websites. But
yep,
it's just a whole TED Talk about how we can discuss this, which is kind of one of the reasons we're doing this show right now.
yep, yep. Excellent. We'll link to
Yeah.
that. Um, but so you have a statistic, Bernie,
Yeah.
about the companies responsible for two-thirds.
Yeah, this was. I even saw her on Jimmy Kimmel recently. Actually, I don't know how I got into that one, but she says only. Well, she mentioned it there because obviously she only gets a few minutes. She didn't get a whole half hour like we get. So she says only 90 companies, so 90 CEOs, because 90 actual people run that, are responsible for over two-thirds of the climate change, the CO2 and methane, and that's obviously the oil, gas, and coal companies. So obviously, actually, she said something about you can put them like in two buses. So what you would do there. But yeah, so that's the majority. But there are obviously the things we can do, like write our Congress people and to organize locally. I mean, those CEOs probably won't make a big change right away because they're still trying to make profits for their shareholders.
Hmm.
But it's
Hmm.
that limited, so that's why it's more important that we do something, I think.
Yeah. And you had talked about what they lobby too, is
Hmm.
they spend a lot of money to spread dis
Right, they're actually spending a fortune to spread disinformation.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
people, regardless of their religion or politics, will actually get the wrong message and think it's not as bad or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that piece of it where, it's industry, it's the corporations, it's companies, it's people that aren't individuals who are contributing
Hmm.
to, all of our emissions or most of our emissions.
Right.
I feel like that can feel very discouraging
Hmm.
because sometimes the little things like, we don't know who's reading our letters. We don't know who's answering or like listening to our phone calls. We don't know, um, how much of an impact is it having if we don't buy as one company's like toilet paper or something like that. And so how would you still kind of encourage people who just feel like, but I can't, like I'm just one person. I just don't think that I can make a difference.
Oh, it's still very important, and everyone can make a difference. And she has a whole last section of her book is you can make a difference. And the chapters are why you matter, what I do, why talking matters, bond, connect, and inspire, and finding hope and courage.
Mm,
So actually, one way that I thought of that our listeners could actually do some of this and see specifics other than just us telling them, they could try to calculate their own carbon footprint. We might have done this once, like 5 years ago, and they're much better calculators in the websites now. So the average for a U.S. person is 16 tons per year. I
mm,
came in just under 10 tons. But the average global is only 4 tons, so we're 4 times worse than the global people. And some people in India and Africa only produce under 2 tons. So the poorest people that suffer the most produce the least and have the least benefits of all these things that we have at 16 tons for the average person in this country. So if
Mhm.
you go on and calculate it for yourself, it's like 5 categories: how much electricity you use. You can always do an option there, get a better mix of electricity or whatever with renewables. How much oil, or if you have oil or kerosene. How much you drive for your car, what kind of car you have, if it's electric or gas or diesel. How much waste you generate. How much you travel, like in airplanes, and food, what kind of food you eat. And of course, vegetarians that you could change to more of that, not complete change. So then you would be eating less meat, and that's really good for the environment. Obviously, you can do less waste and more recycling. You can grow some of your own food. You can get a more efficient car. And if you do have to fly, you can buy carbon offset. Some of the websites have the offset built in, and they even have tips and things you can do for insulation and different mix of energy and electric and so on, which they didn't have before when I last looked at this 5 years ago. So there's lots of things that are built right in the calculator, and then you'll know the averages, your own personal one, and what you can do about it. So I highly
Excellent.
recommend you do something like that for yourself.
Yeah. Now that's a great. I mean, it is so important that we like I haven't given up, even though I do feel like I am on that, you start thinking like, oh, like, but what can I do?
Yeah,
And every little thing does matter, and it turns into a lifestyle, and you can start to infect the people around you. So I do
yeah.
think that it's not for not.
Mhm,
But I did want to highlight one thing that you mentioned, Bernie, about how some of our developing neighbors,
mhm.
they contribute to far less than, for example, us.
Yeah, like 10 times less.
Yes. The latest numbers that I saw were that high income countries
Mhm,
contribute to about 30% of all CO2 emissions. That's not a
mhm,
lot of countries. Whereas low income countries contribute to less than 7%, but are
mhm,
far more impacted.
mhm,
And so, one thing that Dr. Hayhoe had highlighted that I had never heard about was the Conferences of Parties. It's COP,
mhm,
and this is part of the UN. It's like a decision-making body of the convention, and basically, one of the things that they do, I think it's like it's like some kind of country potluck. I don't really know like the full details, but one of the things that this group had agreed on was that richer countries, higher income countries such as the US and the EU, they would provide reparations for lower income countries. And the reparations are for kind of supporting development using cleaner energy options rather than going through the same development process that, for example, the US did or the UK, which went through coal and a lot of really nasty emissions to get to where we are now. And I think a big part of that too is that our wealth is in a lot of ways because of them not developing, and it's all interconnected. And so that that gives us hope that there are a lot of organizations that are trying to um, they're trying solutions to mitigate this and to reverse some of the nasty impacts of climate change. I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. There's always going to be a lot of work to be done, but I think we should still be hopeful because I, for one, had no idea that this was happening. Even though they have their setbacks, hopefully, if with the right people in our political spheres, our economic spheres, there can be some positive change forward.
mhm.
And with that, you have been listening to Scientifically Speaking here on WMPG with myself and Bernie. Stay tuned for something for the weekend with Anella. And from your favorite nerds, I was going to change this, but then our uptick in COVID made me want to keep it. But just a reminder to vaccinate, to mitigate, and then we can all congregate.